The space station's repair bay was quiet, except for the soft hum of tools. Evan knelt beside an open communication terminal, wires spread out like a metallic spider web. He had been fixing circuits for the last 2 hours, his hands moving with steady precision. To him, this was just another work order till he heard footsteps approaching from behind. Without looking up, Evan spoke casually. "If you're here for the comms line, it'll be working in a minute." But the reply he got made him freeze. "Is the shape between my legs distracting you, human?" The voice was calm, smooth, but carried a strange seriousness. Evan's head shot up, eyes meeting a tall, silver-skinned alien girl. Her eyes glowed faintly blue, and her long hair shimmered like liquid metal. Her name tag read Lyra. She was staring straight at him, no hint of a smile, no teasing grin, just a steady, unblinking gaze. Evan's mind went blank for a second. Excuse me," he said, trying to decide if he'd just misheard her. Lyra tilted her head slightly, as if repeating the question would be unnecessary. Around them, a few alien workers had stopped what they were doing. Watching from a distance, the air in the bay suddenly felt heavier. Was this some kind of alien joke, a cultural trap, or something else entirely? Evan could feel his ears heating up. He was no stranger to awkward moments, but this was on another level. Wasn't looking, he managed to say, choosing his words carefully. Lyra crossed her arms. Her expression unreadable. "Strange," she replied. "Your eyes moved when I entered." You looked down for half a second. Was it curiosity or discomfort? Her tone wasn't flirty, was clinical, like she was making an observation for a research log. Evan glanced at the floor, searching for the safest answer possible. "I was just making sure you weren't stepping on loose cables," he said. A murmur ran through the other workers. Some hiding their smirks, Lyra stepped closer, her boots clicking softly against the metal floor. "Humans are difficult to read," she said. "Your reactions are not consistent." Evan decided to change the subject. "Do you need something repaired?" "Yes," Lyra replied instantly. "Me?" That one word stopped Evan cold. "You?" he asked. "You mean your uniform? Or my body?" She said without hesitation, "There is something wrong with me." "And you noticed?" Evan blinked, his brain racing, trying to understand if this was still the same conversation, or if she just switched to another topic entirely. Lyra didn't move, didn't blink. Her presence was intense, like standing in front of a silent storm. "What exactly do you think I noticed?" Evan asked slowly. She glanced down briefly, then back at him. "The shape between my legs. It is different from the others of my kind." Evan suddenly realized the silence around them had grown. Every alien in the bay was pretending to work while clearly listening. This wasn't just an awkward encounter anymore. This was a scene, and for some reason, Lyra didn't seem to care. "Listen," Evan said, keeping his voice low. "I'm not sure what you think I saw, but I wasn't," she interrupted. "You looked human. Even if for a moment, you reacted. I want to know why." Her voice had no anger, no shame, just pure curiosity. Evan exhaled slowly. Maybe she was testing him. Maybe this was part of some alien interaction ritual he didn't understand. Or maybe she really thought he'd spotted something important. His mind flashed back to her serious expression. There was no mockery there, no amusement. "What makes you think something's wrong?" Evan asked. Lyra hesitated for the first time, a faint flicker in her eyes. "There is a condition among my people," she said softly. "It affects structure. I may have it." She took another step closer, lowering her voice now so the others wouldn't hear. "And if I do, I will be exiled." Evan's stomach tightened. So this wasn't a joke, not a trap, was fear. Hidden under blunt words and alien logic. He wanted to say something reassuring, but Lyra was already turning away. "Think about what you saw, human," she said, without looking back. "I will return," as she walked out. The other aliens exchanged knowing looks. Some shook their heads, others whispered, but none of them explained anything. Evan stood there in the quiet hum of the repair bay, the smell of heated circuits around him. One thing was certain, this was no ordinary maintenance shift, and something told him that whatever Lyra meant, he was now part of it. Evan didn't sleep much that night. He kept hearing Lyra's voice in his head, calm, direct, and disturbingly honest. He had been around aliens before, but never one who could shatter the barrier between personal and public with a single sentence. It wasn't just the words. It was the way she said them, like she wasn't trying to embarrass him at all. The next morning, Evan walked into the repair bay with a knot in his stomach. The other workers were already whispering. Glancing at him, one alien mechanic gave him a grin that was way too knowing. Another tapped a finger to his temple, as if to say, "Good luck understanding her." He set his tools down and got to work. But halfway through tightening a bolt, he noticed movement in the corner of his vision. Lyra was standing there again, silent, watching him. This time, Evan decided not to wait for her to speak first. "Morning," he said cautiously. "Morning," she replied, her voice smooth but unreadable. She walked up to him, standing closer than most humans would feel comfortable with. "Have you thought about my question?" she asked. Evan sighed. "Lyra, your question was unusual." She tilted her head. "Unusual for humans, or unusual for anyone?" "For humans," Evan admitted, "we don't usually talk about body shapes the first time we meet." Lyra blinked slowly, her silver skin catching the light. "That explains much," she said. "Among my people, such questions are normal. Health is not privacy, is public. If you see something unusual, you speak about it. It could save a life." Evan's brow furrowed. "So, you weren't," she cut in, "flirting? No? Testing you?" "No. I was asking because you are human. Your eyes notice details others overlook." Evan almost laughed in relief, but her tone stayed serious. "So this is cultural," he said. "Not personal." Lyra's gaze sharpened. "It is personal when it is about my survival." Her words hit heavier than he expected. He leaned against the workbench. "You mentioned exile. What did you mean?" She glanced around the bay before answering, her voice dropping. "In my colony, a body that develops with irregularities is seen as weak. Weakness is dangerous. It spreads doubt. Doubt spreads fear. Fear destroys. Unity, that's harsh," Evan muttered. Lyra's lips twitched, not a smile, not a frown, just a controlled reaction. "It is how we remain strong," she said. "But sometimes they exile those who could still live normal lives." Evan studied her for a moment. She looked strong, balanced, perfectly healthy from his human perspective. Whatever she feared, it wasn't obvious. "You said you think I noticed something," he said slowly, "but maybe I didn't notice anything at all." Her eyes narrowed. "Or maybe you noticed, but you didn't understand what you saw." Before Evan could reply, another alien entered the bay, a tall, broad-shouldered male with deep green skin. He strode straight toward Lyra, ignoring Evan completely. "The council has confirmed your evaluation date," the male said in a low voice. Evan noticed Lyra's posture stiffen ever so slightly. "When?" she asked. "3 days," he said. "Be ready." Without another word, he left. Evan waited until they were alone again. That evaluation. "It's about this irregularity, isn't it?" Lyra didn't answer right away. Finally, she said, "Yes. And once they decide, there is no appeal." Evan could feel the weight in her voice. He didn't know why it bothered him so much. He'd just met her, but something about the way she spoke told him this wasn't just a medical check. It was a judgment, and if she failed, she'd lose everything. I'm guessing you can't just explain that it doesn't affect your abilities, he said. Lyra gave a small, humorless laugh. They would say a defective blade should not be in the armory, no matter how sharp it still is. Silence settled between them for a moment. Evan went back to his tools, but his mind wasn't on the repairs. If she was telling the truth, and he believed she was, then her people were about to throw her away over something that might not even matter. And for some reason, he hated the thought. You said humans notice details, Evan said finally. Maybe I could help you figure out what's going on. Lyra tilted her head again, as if weighing his offer. You would involve yourself in another species' internal matters. She asked, call it curiosity, Evan said, or stubbornness. Take your pick. For the first time, Lyra's lips curved just slightly. It wasn't a full smile, but it was something. You are strange, human, she said, but maybe useful. Before Evan could reply, she turned and walked away. Her steps smooth and deliberate. Over her shoulder, she added, meet me tonight in the observation deck. I will tell you more. Evan stood there, tools in hand, watching her go. The whispers in the bay started again, but he barely heard them. He didn't know why he was getting involved. He barely understood her problem, and she barely trusted him. But one thing was certain. This was no longer just a repair job. It was becoming something much bigger. The observation deck of the station was quiet at night. Only the faint hum of the artificial gravity system and the distant thrum of the engines could be heard. Large glass panels curved above and around, showing an endless sea of stars. Evan stood there alone, hands in his jacket pockets, wondering if Lyra would actually come. He had arrived early. Part of him thought she might change her mind. Another part feared she wouldn't show up at all. But then he heard the soft sound of boots behind him. When he turned, Lyra was there, silent as ever. Silver skin reflecting the starlight. You came, Evan said quietly. I said I would, she replied, stepping forward until she stood beside him. Her gaze shifted to the stars, but her expression was unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching. Then Lyra said, I will tell you what I have not told any human. Evan turned toward her, listening carefully. My people, she began, are born with certain markers, biological indicators of strength, agility, and reproductive health. These are measured in many ways: movement, endurance, and shape. She paused, the last word hanging in the air. You mean the shape you asked me about? Evan said yes, Lyra replied. It is not a word meant to provoke, but a medical term in our language. Evan frowned. And you think yours is different? Lyra's eyes flickered toward him. It is not what I think. It is what the others have whispered since I was young. She took a slow breath, as if choosing each word carefully. In my species, a difference in certain bone structures often means a genetic fault, one that can cause weakness in later cycles. Sometimes it is harmless. Sometimes it kills. Evan felt the weight of her words. And your people. Exile anyone who might have it. Yes, she said simply. The logic is survival. Remove the weak before they become a burden. Her voice was calm, but Evan caught the faintest tremor beneath it. How do they even test for something like that? He asked. Lyra's gaze dropped to the floor. They measure, they scan, they compare. If the results are outside the acceptable pattern, the council rules. Evan leaned against the railing, thinking, so. You weren't asking me that question just to be awkward, he said. You were hoping I'd notice something? Maybe confirm what you feared? Lyra looked at him sharply. I was hoping you would see nothing that made him pause. You wanted me to tell you you're fine, he said softly. Her eyes shifted away again. Humans are known to notice flaws others miss. If you saw one, then perhaps the council will too. Evan rubbed the back of his neck. I didn't see a flaw, he admitted. I saw a person who walked in, caught me off guard, and asked a question no human would expect. That's it, something in her. Posture eased slightly, but it didn't last long. Even if you believe that, Lyra said. The council may not. They have already scheduled my evaluation. Her words carried a finality that bothered him. So you're just going to let them decide your fate? Evan asked, her head tilted. What choice do I have? Evan thought for a moment. What if we find proof that your structure isn't a weakness? Something scientific. Something they can't argue with. Lyra gave him a long look. You would involve yourself in this? Risk the council's disapproval? Humans are not favored here, Evan shrugged. I've been unpopular before. That earned the faintest flicker of amusement in her eyes. You are strange, human, she said again. But her voice was softer this time. They stood there for a while, neither speaking. Just watching the stars drift past, Evan's mind was already turning, thinking about medical scans, engineering sensors, and ways to record data without the council knowing. Lyra finally broke the silence. If you truly wish to help me, meet me tomorrow in the medical wing after the second cycle bell. I can give you access to my preliminary scans. Evan nodded. I'll be there. Lyra looked at him for a moment longer, as if trying to read his intentions. Then she turned to leave, but before she reached the door, she stopped, without looking back. She said, Do not give me hope if you cannot protect it. Human. Her words lingered in the air long after she left. Evan stayed at the window, staring out into the endless dark. He didn't know if he could really change her fate, but he knew one thing. He wasn't about to watch her get thrown away over something that might not even matter. Tomorrow, he would find out the truth, one way or another. The medical wing smelled faintly of sterilized metal and clean air. Rows of silver examination pods lined the walls, each with glowing panels and alien script scrolling across their displays. Evan stepped inside quietly, his boots making barely a sound on the smooth floor. Lyra was already there, sitting on the edge of a diagnostic bed. Her silver skin caught the light in a way that made her seem almost unreal. She didn't greet him right away. Instead, she tapped something on the panel beside her. A holographic screen flickered to life, filled with strange anatomical diagrams. You came, she said finally, glancing at him from the corner of her eye. You asked me to, Evan replied, walking closer. This, she gestured to the display, is my preliminary scan. It will be sent to the council tomorrow. You have until then to see what you can. Evan studied the glowing image. The figure on the screen was clearly Lyra's species, slender, with elongated limbs and an intricate bone structure. He saw the highlighted section around her hips and lower spine. That's the area you were talking about, he said. Yes, she answered. They say the spacing of the bones here should fall within a certain range. Mine is outside the range. Evan frowned, leaning in closer from a human perspective. It didn't look abnormal, it looked like a natural variation. Has anyone proven this spacing actually causes weakness? He asked. Lyra shook her head. It is tradition. Tradition does not require proof. That made Evan's jaw tighten. Then maybe it's time someone gave them proof, he said. Her eyes narrowed slightly. And how will you do that? He gave her a small grin. By thinking like a human engineer. Before she could respond, he pulled a small device from his jacket, his personal scanner. It wasn't as advanced as alien tech, but it was built for flexibility. I can compare your bone density, muscle tension, and structural balance against hundreds of other biological models, he explained. If I can prove your body is as strong or stronger than the average for your people, they can't just call you weak. Lyra tilted her head. Skeptical, but curious. You would do this? In secret. Unless you want the council to find out before we're ready, Evan said. Her lips pressed together for a moment before she gave a small nod. Do it, she said. Evan ran the scanner over her form, the soft hum filling the air. She stood, perfectly still, her posture flawless, up close. He noticed things he hadn't before: teeny metallic flecks in her hair, the subtle shimmer in her skin, the way her eyes reflected light like polished crystal. But he kept his focus on the readings. After several minutes, the scanner chimed softly. Evan pulled up the data and began cross-referencing it with the alien anatomy charts Lyra had provided. What he saw made his brow furrow. Your bone spacing is different, yeah? But your density is higher than average. That means you can take more physical stress without damage, he said. Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly. You are saying my difference is a strength. Exactly, Evan replied. It's like having a reinforced frame in a ship. So, Ev's heavier, but it can survive more damage for the first time since he'd met her. Lyra's expression actually shifted into something close to hope, but just as quickly, it faded. The council will not believe it if it comes from a human, she said. Evan leaned back against the diagnostic bed. Then we won't make it about who says it. We'll make it impossible for them to argue. He explained his plan using the station's training hall to measure her physical performance under stress, then embedding those results in the medical system before the council meeting. If her performance exceeded the average, the council would have to acknowledge it. Lyra listened in silence, then said, if we are caught altering records, it will be worse for both of us. Evan smirked slightly. Then we won't get caught. They set the time for that night, when the training hall would be empty. Before he left the medical wing, Lyra said something that made him pause at the door. You risk much for someone you barely know, she said quietly. Evan looked back at her. You're right. But I know enough. Later that night, the hall was dimly lit, the automated systems running in low power mode. Evan adjusted the performance trackers on the wall, feeding the data link directly into the medical archive. Lyra stepped into the center of the room, her movements fluid and precise. She began the test speed runs. Jumps, balance holds, heavy resistance lifts. Evan watched in growing amazement. She wasn't just strong. She was faster and more stable than most humans he'd seen. By the end, the data was undeniable. Her readings placed her in the top 10% for her species in every category except one, traditional bone spacing. Evan locked the results into the system. When they were done, Lyra stood quietly, her breathing even. You have given me numbers, she said, but numbers do not change minds. They will when we make them public, Evan said. She studied him for a moment, then gave a single nod. For the first time, she admitted softly, I think I may have a chance. The council chamber was a wide, circular hall. Rows of tiered seats curved upward, filled with members of different ranks and colors. Each one wore ceremonial robes with patterns marking their clan. In the center of the room was a raised platform, the judgment circle where the accused would stand. Today, Lyra stood there, her silver skin gleaming under the bright overhead lights. Evan sat in the visitor section, far to the side. Technically, humans weren't allowed to participate in these proceedings. He was only there because he had managed to convince one of the attendants he was Lyra's maintenance escort. It wasn't a complete lie. He was maintaining her future. The head counselor, a tall figure with deep violet skin and eyes like molten gold, stood and spoke. Lyra of the Solon line, you are here to confirm your physical structure meets the standards of our people. His voice carried across the chamber, smooth but heavy with authority. If your measurements fall outside acceptable ranges, you will be reassigned to exile. Evan felt his jaw tighten at the word exile. To these people, it sounded like a formality. To him, it sounded like they were throwing someone into a black hole and forgetting about them. An attendant stepped forward with a medical tablet. "Preliminary scans," she announced. "Show irregular bone spacing in the lower structure." A low murmur rippled through the chamber. The head counselor raised a hand for silence. "This matches the reports from her youth," he said. "The defect has not changed." Evan wanted to stand up and shout, "It's not a defect," but he held back. This had to be done carefully. He glanced toward Leoroshi, stood tall, expression calm. But her hands were clenched behind her back. Hidden from view, the council moved to the next. "Phase performance records will now be reviewed," one of the secondary counselors said. A massive screen lowered from the ceiling, lines of data appear jump heights. Sprint times, resistance loads. Evan's heart pounded. These were the numbers he had worked so hard to put in place. The first readings appeared. Gasps rose from the audience. Her sprint speed was far above average. Her lift capacity higher than many trained soldiers. Even the counselors leaned forward. Scanning the data, the head counselor's eyes narrowed. "These results are unusual," he said slowly. "They exceed our average benchmarks." One of the older council members frowned. "Impossible. The structure is flawed. The performance should be lower." Evan allowed himself the smallest smile. Now they had to confront the truth. Lyra's voice broke the silence, steady and clear. "Perhaps the flaw you speak of is not weakness, but difference," she said. Her tone carried no arrogance, just certainty. "I have trained to be as capable as any of my peers. The data proves I can match or surpass them." The head counselor tapped his fingers against the podium. "Data can be forged," he said coldly. A knot formed in Evan's chest. This was the danger he had feared. If they accused her of cheating, everything would collapse before anyone else could speak. Evan stood up. All eyes turned toward him. "I'm a human engineer," he said loudly. "I was present when these readings were taken. I personally calibrated the devices." There was no forging. A wave of murmurs swept the room. Humans rarely interrupted council sessions. The head counselor's gaze locked onto Evan. "You speak out of turn, human," he said. "Maybe," Evan replied, "but truth doesn't wait for permission." The council chamber went silent. The head counselor's jaw tightened, but he turned back to Lyra. "Your results will be reviewed in further detail," he said. "Until then, the verdict is suspended." Gasps and whispers filled the air. Suspended meant she wasn't cleared yet. But she also wasn't exiled. It bought them time. Lyra's eyes flickered toward Evan for a moment, just a fraction of a second. But in that look was something he hadn't seen before. Gratitude. She didn't speak, but the message was clear. "You gave me a chance." As the council adjourned, Evan followed Lyra out through the side corridor. They didn't speak until they were away from the echoing voices of the chamber. "You didn't have to stand up," she said quietly. "Yeah," Evan said. "But I wasn't going to sit there while they called you weak." Her steps slowed. For the first time since they'd met, she looked less like the unshakable warrior she tried to be. "You risked your own place here," she said. "I've never been great at staying where I'm not wanted," he replied with a small grin. They walked in silence for a moment before Lyra finally said, "The fight is not over. They will try to disprove the results." Evan's grin widened just slightly. "Then we make sure they can't." 2 days after the trial, the council summoned Lyra again. This time, the message was short. Final assessment at dawn. No delay. Evan was in the repair bay when she found him. "They are not satisfied," she said, her voice low. "They believe the numbers you presented can be explained by human interference." Evan wiped his hands on a cloth, frustration flashing in his eyes. "Of course they'd say that," he muttered. "So what's their plan?" "Another scan." Lyra shook her head. "No. A live demonstration. In front of the entire council and the senior warriors." Evan's chest tightened. This was more than just a test. It was a public trial disguised as sport. "What happens if you fail?" he asked, even though he already knew the answer. Her eyes didn't waver. Exile. Immediate. For a moment, neither spoke. The quiet hum of the machinery filled the space between them. Finally, Evan asked, "What exactly do they want you to do?" Lyra hesitated, then said, "The trial of endurance. It is dangerous. It has killed before." That was all he needed to hear. "Then I'm helping you," he said instantly. Her eyes narrowed. "If they see you helping me, they will exile you as well." Evan gave a half smile. "Then I'll just make sure they don't see it." The next morning, the trial arena was filled with spectators. It was a massive circular space, the walls lined with glowing alien symbols. Weapons and obstacle structures were scattered across the floor-tall climbing frames. Heavy weightlifts, spinning balance beams, and moving target drones at the far end. A massive timing pillar counted down the minutes. The head counselor's voice echoed across the arena. "This trial will determine if Lyra of the Solon line meets the strength and endurance worthy of her people. She will complete the course under the standard time, or she will be removed from our ranks." Lyra stepped forward, her silver skin catching the bright arena light. She didn't look at Evans. She couldn't, but she knew he was there in the shadows of the maintenance bay just behind the crowd. From his position, Evan had access to the arena's secondary control panel. It was risky, but it gave him a way to adjust things if needed. The horn sounded, and Lyra launched forward. Her movements were precise. Powerful, she leaped over barriers, scaled the climbing frames with speed that made the crowd murmur in surprise. But the council had clearly modified the course to make it harder. The balance beams spun faster than usual. The target drones fired more aggressively. Evan's hands moved quickly over the control panel. He didn't cheat, he didn't lower the difficulty, but he timed the hazards so they wouldn't hit her. At unfair moments, he also subtly rerouted the cooling vents to blow across the track, helping her keep from overheating halfway through. Lyra reached the endurance lift's massive weights, shaped like alien shields. She lifted them one by one, her muscles straining. The crowd went silent when she managed the final one, holding it above her head for a full 5 seconds before slamming it down. Evan couldn't help a small grin. Those council members couldn't deny that strength. But the last obstacle was the worst, a moving wall with shifting handholds. You had to climb it before it rotated out of reach. Lyra jumped onto it, her fingers gripping tightly. Halfway up, the wall sped up faster than regulations allowed. Evan realized instantly that someone had tampered with it to make her fail. He tapped into the system, quickly slowing the rotation back to its normal speed. It wasn't much, but it gave her just enough time to reach the top. She pulled herself over just as the timer hit the final seconds. The crowd erupted, some in cheers, some in disbelief. The head counselor stood, his expression unreadable. "Lyra of the Solon line," he said slowly, "you have completed the trial." Within time, a wave of murmurs swept through the arena. Her people had expected her to fall, but she hadn't. Lyra stood there, breathing hard, sweat glistening on her silver skin. She looked toward the crowd just for a moment, and her eyes found Evan. No smile, no words, but the connection was there. She knew, and he knew, that without his quiet interference, she might not have made it. The council huddled together, speaking in low voices. When they turned back, the head counselor gave the verdict. "You have 2 choices," he said. "Remain with your people under constant evaluation for the rest of your service, or leave now and choose your own path." It was a cruel choice: stay under a shadow of doubt forever, or walk away from everything she had known. Evan felt his stomach twist. He knew what he'd pick. But this was her life. Lyra stood silently for a long moment, her eyes scanning the faces of the council. Then the crowd. Finally, she turned back to the head counselor and said, I choose my own path. Gasps filled the air. This was unheard of, without waiting for their dismissal. She walked out of the arena, her steps steady. Evan slipped away from the control panel and met her in the corridor outside. They're going to see that as betrayal, he said quietly. They already saw me as weak. She replied, now they will see me as free. The docking bay was quiet when Lyra and Evan arrived. No council guards. No farewell ceremony, just the low hum of a small transport ship waiting with its ramp down. Lyra carried a single travel case. The only belongings she was allowed to take, Evan had already loaded his small toolkit. It was all he ever really needed. They walked side by side toward the ship. Neither spoke for the first few steps. The silence heavy, but not uncomfortable. Finally, Evan broke it. So, just like that, you're done with them? Lyra's gaze stayed forward. They were done with me long before today. The ramp hissed as they stepped aboard. The ship's interior was modest: 2 small sleeping cabins, a narrow galley, and a cockpit with a wide view of the stars. Evan moved to the pilot's seat while Lyra placed her case in the corner. You know, he said, glancing at her, you didn't have to come with me. You could have found another crew, maybe even another colony. Lyra leaned against the wall, arms crossed, and go where? Be inspected at every port. Wait for whispers to follow me. No, she said firmly. If I am to start again, it will be where no one measures the space between my bones. Evan gave a small smile. Well, I don't measure people like that. Her eyes softened, but only slightly. No, you measure by what someone can do, not what they look like. He turned back to the controls, powering up the ship as the docking clamps released. The station began to shrink behind them. A giant silver ring fading into the black. Lyra stood behind him, watching it disappear. She didn't speak, but Evan could sense the mix of relief and loss in her silence. After a while, she asked, "Where will we go?" "Somewhere they can't follow," Evan said. "And somewhere you don't have to prove anything to anyone." Lyra tilted her head. "Is there such a place for humans?" Evan chuckled. "Not really, but I make them as I go." They drifted. For hours, the hum of the engines a steady background when Evan got up to check the navigation array. He found Lyra in the galley. She was studying his toolkit. Running her fingers over the worn handles, "These are old," she said, "but well cared for." "They've been with me longer than most people have," he replied, leaning against the doorway. Her gaze lifted to his. "You keep them because they work." Evan shrugged. "Exactly. Why throw away something that still has value?" There was a pause, and then she said, almost too quietly, "My people do not think that way." Evan's voice softened. "Then they've lost more than they realize." That night, the ship drifted through an open stretch of space. Evan sat in the cockpit, adjusting the navigation lights. He heard soft footsteps and looked over to see Lyra stepping in, her silver skin catching the dim glow. She didn't sit, she stood beside his chair, looking out at the endless stars. "You could have walked away back there," she said, without turning. "You could have let them decide my fate." Evan leaned back in the seat. "Yeah, I could have, but I didn't." "Why?" she asked simply. He thought for a moment before answering. "Because you matter. And I don't need a reason bigger than that." For a long time, she didn't reply. Then she said, "No one in my life has ever said that to me." Evan glanced at her. Then maybe it's about time someone did. She finally turned toward him. And for the first time since he'd met her, she smiled, small, almost hesitant, but real. It was the kind of smile that made the cold edges in her voice soften. "Humans are strange," she said quietly, "but sometimes strange is good." Hours later, as the ship approached a nebula glowing faintly blue, Lyra sat in the co-pilot's seat. They didn't need to talk much now. The quiet between them was no longer awkward. She reached over and touched one of the switches on the console. "What does this do?" she asked. "Nothing you need to worry about," Evan replied with a smirk. "Is the shape still distracting?" "You human," she said suddenly, her tone light but teasing. Evan burst out laughing, shaking his head. "Now it's just a private joke." Lyra's smirk deepened. "Good. Then it means you're not afraid of it anymore." "Afraid?" Evan said. "No?" Curious. Maybe the ship slipped deeper into the nebula, stars shimmering like scattered jewels for the first time in years. Lyra wasn't being measured, judged, or compared. For the first time, Evan wasn't fixing something. For someone who didn't care, he was building something that mattered. And somewhere, far behind them, the voices of the council faded into nothing. They had no set destination, no guarantee of safety. But they had a ship, the stars, and each other, and for now, that was enough.